appreciate Chairman Erickson and us joining together here. We will have a presentation on the Re-Up education from Tara Cruz, the CEO of Re-Up. And we're going to be learning more about people that have some college but no credential, and seeing what strategies can be employed to get them some credential or to allow them to get back into the workforce in some manner. So I'd like to welcome to the committee Tara Cruz.
Thank you, chairs. Thank you, senators, representatives. I'm happy to talk to you today. So I'm here today to talk to you about persistent and chronic national problem. I'm going to start with a little bit of like the national landscape here. The some college no credential, you hear me referring to that multiple times, is often ignored as part of the national landscape. But this is a very large population. In fact, it's 41 million people. About 1 in 6 working adults today have some college and no credential. Just to put that in perspective, that 41 million is larger than AARP. And they have 0 lobbyists supporting them, or at least until our colleagues here began to support. Currently, all of the solutions that focus on this really focus on a very narrow subset of this population, those people who've been out for less than a year, or those who are very near to completion, only a few credits away from graduation. I'm going to be talking to you about what this looks like in Kansas and how this presents not just a challenge, but also an opportunity. So let's take a look at Kansas. There's about 413,000 of people in Kansas with the some college no credential. That population grows by about 10,000 per year. Here's why you should really care about it, though. Kansas is actually proportionally doing worse than your neighboring states, particularly Missouri and Oklahoma. This population also represents a significant sunk cost in part of the state appropriations. Every year, you invest about $90 million in subsidizing public education for people who will quit that year. So what does this mean in terms of the individual details? Well, the challenges here, this data you know well. The enrollment numbers at your four-year institutions and the community colleges generally are down over the last decade or so. Simultaneously, you have significant opportunity and need in the workforce. By the latest data that we've had access to, there's about 51 skilled workers for every 100 jobs in Kansas, and the problem's only going to get worse over the next several years. Simultaneously, your institutions are actually doing relatively well compared to your peers. You have online programs. The online programs are very appealing to this particular population, many of which have children, are working full-time jobs. But you're losing a significant chunk of learners every year to out-of-state institutions. And just to put this into context here, there's about 15,000 people every year, Kansas residents, who are enrolling in out-of-state institutions. Now, at first glance, you might say, well, as long as they're going back to schools, why do we care? Why you should care is that's $100 million in Kansas dollars that are being funneled to other states, most notably New Hampshire and Maryland. University of Maryland Global Campus, Southern New Hampshire University are spending significantly to attract this population of learners to their out-of-state schools. In most cases, your schools are a better solution for these learners. They're cheaper and they have better outcomes. What we focus on is the opportunity for Kansas to keep those learners in state, increasing the enrollment of your schools and ultimately supporting your workforce pipeline in the process. So the question you may ask is, why aren't our schools actually doing anything about this? Well, if it was easy, everyone would. The primary reason the schools do not focus on this is that it's not cost effective for them to do individually, and they're candidly just being beaten by those large online institutions. Just 2 of the institutions that are some of the biggest players in the market, collectively, those 2 spend $300 million a year in attracting people with some college no credential to go to their schools. It's very difficult for your average public or community college or technical college to compete in that type of market. But through a statewide approach, which we'll come back to here in a couple minutes, it is possible for your schools to be able to compete and keep those students within state. To do this and to do it effectively, there's several components that are critical to helping people come back. First off, you have to be able to find them and find them in a cost-effective manner. There's good news. Every one of your schools has very large databases of people who started but didn't finish. They're not doing anything with them. Those databases go back about 25 years. They're not outreaching them unless they've been out for less than a year, by and large. So you have the data existing in all the schools that you own today. That can be centralized. That helps you with the finding them. Once you find them, you can, through collective action, you can engage them and give them options to not just go back to their original school, but go back anywhere. Prime example I like to say is, in some of our work in other states, we have people who started an engineering degree that didn't quite work out for them. They finished up as a welder. That's a great outcome. They started at a four-year institution. They finished up at a technical college. They now have a living wage to be able to support their family and a sustainable career towards their future. And then you need to continue to support them to graduation, because most of these learners most of these institutions don't have a lot of experience working with this population, so you need to be able to provide, centralize, and continue to support them all the way until they finish. So this is a little bit of an eye chart, but I'm going to make it a little bit easier on you. You should read this vertically, not horizontally. And what this will do is it'll give you a sense of trends and how your peer states and how other states are thinking about this. So let's take a look at that first column there as a starter. What you can take away from this is the majority of states are offering some type of incentive program, some type of debt program or scholarship program directly to students. Sometimes this is as little as $300 or $400 for people who have debt that's keeping them going back to school. Sometimes it's significant scholarships to help people go back to school. The second thing I would draw your attention to is that first gold column. Most states who are doing this are making the mistake of focusing in on just people who are near completers, have 15, 30 credits or so, or have only been out less than a year. That is a small fraction of your 400,000 and will lead to only a small percentage actually coming back into schools. The third thing I draw your attention to is that the trend is moving towards state collective effort. So a single state agency has been empowered to address this. The reason for that is that when individual schools approach this, they focus on only getting those students back to their school. And in a resource-constrained environment, they focus in on only those people who've been out for less than a year beyond. Through a statewide strategy, you get significant economies of scale, and you get the benefit of helping these residents go back to any school that might be a good fit for them. And feel free to stop me at any time if you have questions, but I will hold plenty of time at the end. So how do these models look? Ultimately, the models that different states are choosing can be thought of on a continuum. On the far left here, you're going to see most impactful, best results, and cheapest. I imagine that's what most of you are looking for right now. As you go further down, systems, the price gets a little bit more expensive to do this successfully, and it's not quite as impactful. And ultimately, a decentralized approach where every institution addresses this yields the worst results and is ultimately the most expensive, because they're only targeting those people who came out from their school, and you get no transfer, no movement between the individual schools, and that school has to build out resources that could be shared across many institutions simultaneously. So in short, as you look through this, a centralized state approach, the reason states are approaching it this way is, candidly, it's cost effective, it leverages the investments you've made across all of your institutions, and gives the most optionality to your residents, yielding the best impact. So why does this matter? I mentioned this in passing at the beginning, but as you think about this, Is this going to help enrollment at the individual institutions? Absolutely. We have some schools that we've worked with in cases like North Carolina where they've seen as much as 5 or 6% of their enrollment now comes from a some college no credential population. Particularly regional schools benefit the most, as with community colleges. That said, I would say that the reason you should care most about this is really thinking about your workforce pipeline. Ultimately, this is 400,000 growing 10,000 per year. Put that in perspective, you have 35,000 high school students that are graduating. This is a massive population that is unaddressed with no resources currently dedicated to them. Think about all the resources you're dedicating to helping high school students find their way to college. There is currently nothing dedicated to this population. This population is more likely to have roots in Kansas. What we've seen in other states is 93% of people who stopped out stayed in their area. They now have children, they now have families, they have jobs, they have friends. You don't get brain drain with this population. They're looking for a path to a better life, to a better job, and they stay. They're also part of the way there. So if you're thinking about workforce gaps that you have, this is a group of people that are highly motivated to go and pursue job programs, jobs, and careers that are available in their area and that are going to lead to a higher wage. It's a significant population to address your workforce shortage. So I'm going to give you a case study. I've got New Jersey pulled up here, but I'll also speak to you about a case study out of North Carolina that's fresh off the presses that just got back from their General Assembly. New Jersey, we started working with 24 months ago in terms of enrollment effort. 24 months in, there's about 260,000 people in a centralized database that the state legislators and governor's office has access to. We're able to break it down by zip code, tell them all sorts of things about an at-risk population that previously they've struggled to have insight into. This population is more likely to be on entitlement programs, they're more likely to be underemployed, and we're able to track this and monitor it and report it back to the state. In that 24 months, we've been able to re-enroll 11,000. New Jersey estimates from 22 schools. New Jersey estimates that the total economic impact of the effort is $91 million to date, but hard, I know sometimes those economic numbers can vary from state to state and how you calculate it. Hard numbers that are easily to point to is $44 million in tuition dollars returned to the state or to the state system schools. It's been a major hit. Governor's office and legislator there, they've renewed twice at this point. But to give you an example of another state, just a little bit further south, North Carolina started at the exact same time. Now, North Carolina did start with a smaller group. They wanted to see the impact, they wanted to see the results before they invested and they expanded. There we started with 7 schools, it's now expanded to 10, only 4-year colleges. That's less ideal because we know a lot of people would prefer to go to community colleges. But I give you that context and background. There's about 90 or 100,000 people in the database today. 24 months in, 3,700 people returned just to the 4-year schools. And I just heard 2 weeks ago, the Assembly says there's $23 million in tuition dollars returned to the school during that time. They're seeing about a 7x return on their investment to date. That's the extent of my presentation. I'd prefer it be more conversational, but I'll give you a little bit of background and up to date, and we'll start from there.
Thank you, Tara, for your presentation. I'm sure we'll have some questions. I'll probably defer some of the questions to our senators here with us today as they have to get back to the floor before 1:30. So if there's, oh, it's 2:30, I'm sorry. Well, they would have been late if they were on house time, but anyways. So any questions from senators for Tara? We'll go with Senator Shane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I'll ask a very specific technical question. So how is FERPA managed by the creation of a centralized enrollment database for a state?
Well, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Senator Shane. It's an excellent question. So we are able to create, we're fully FERPA compliant. Our company has been around for 10 years. So we work directly with the schools to be able to pass off. We have audits every year to ensure that we remain completely FERPA compliant. And then any data that we would report back to you is fully anonymized. So you're not getting, we don't pull in individual things happening at the individual learner level. We have 10 years of doing this, over 140 schools partnered with us, but it can be done, it can be reported out, as long as it's in aggregate and as long as it's anonymized.
Thank you, Senator Shane. Next, we'll go to Senator Starnes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. And just a little information, not necessarily question, but in my other job, I represent Build Up Kansas. It's a state workforce development initiative through the legislature, line item budget. And what we do is build up career and technical education, vocational programs, skilled labor in schools. In Kansas, typically carpentry, construction, electrical, HVAC, plumbing, and now with ag, with welding. And so we also provide that service as far as a textbook and all the resources for the students to be able to have that available to them. The teachers then are trained on how to teach that curriculum. And then the second last piece is that then they test for a nationally recognized credential. It's NCCER, it's the credential of choice across the country as far as recognition with construction. So an opportunity for win-win. According to our data, we have 58,000 jobs in the next 3-5 years in Kansas in construction. Average starting salary $60,000 and little to no debt. We have 130 plus high schools, community colleges, and four-year universities that are working with us as well. And so with this, is this a similar type of program, I guess, in that sense? And anything that you can expound upon that. And I'm sorry to brag about it, but it's an unbelievable program. I'm just telling you, take it home to your people and get them involved because it is a real need.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Senator Starnes, for the question. The short answer is it is the word I'm looking for. It's supportive of that existing program. So if your existing program is working with, as I understand it, targeting primarily high school students or people already enrolled, we will work with that program to send additional people to that program. Particularly, we don't work with sub 18-year-olds, so we don't work with a high school population. But these 400,000 who have now gone on to other things in life, we'll outreach them, and we will make those programs available to them. We're fully agnostic in terms of how people are what programs people choose, and if that is something of interest, we can actually prioritize those programs in terms of the available options that are shown to the learners.
I appreciate that very much. And anything, like you said, you talked about people that get into engineering and decide, okay, we also do that as a part of the program as well, to allow them then the opportunity to get into the career that makes the most sense for them as far as them also. And I appreciate greatly the information about student debt and what you're doing to relieve that piece of that important part of the equation of this. So anything that we could do as well to support, we would be very much appreciative and welcome it.
Of course.
Thank you for that, Senator Starnes. Next, we'll go to Senator Gossage.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your presentation. I'm just trying to understand, Tara, so what exactly does, we hear there's a problem, right? The first several pages are there's a problem. And then look at how great things were in New Jersey. But what exactly does your organization do?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Senator Gossage. Excellent question. So, look, when I do these meetings, I'm primarily here to educate you on the opportunity. Now, obviously, we would love to partner, but I do not come in with the intent of pitching you on re-up. But if you're asking the question, I'm more than happy to. How re-up works today is if we were to partner with Kansas, we then reach out to every single one of the institutions within the state and give them the opportunity to participate in the program. We generally see very high uptick. with this. In fact, New Jersey was oversubscribed. North Carolina was oversubscribed. They actually had to pause any additional institutions coming in until the next legislative session to see if additional funding could allow for it. Once those institutions partner, they develop data sharing agreements with us. So they share over that large database I mentioned earlier that they don't currently do anything with. We then break that database down. We identify who the people are. We append it with publicly available data. We have our own patented personas to identify what messaging is most likely to appeal and engage with people. And then we outreach them through all of the above approach. Notably, we're not a call center, but I do have coaches, and I have coaches that are available as much as your residents need them. We outreach them through text, we outreach them through email, we outreach them through social media, through every avenue available, and we even provide an application available to them that they can download onto their phone that provides every program available into the state. Once we've outreached, we begin a long process of helping these learners find the way back. Most of them have moved on with their lives. Our average learner, if I needed to give you a simple persona, it's a working mom, working at your local store building. I don't know what your favorite burritos place is nearby, but she's working in an hourly wage position, maybe helping take care of parents. Life is complex. If I could break them down as anything, time poverty is the primary way I would describe our population. Once we've reached out to them, some are ready to go back relatively quickly. They just needed a little bit of help navigating the process. We support them all the way through the application process and even after they've continued to enroll. Others need to restructure their life to get to a place where they can make their way back. It is not uncommon for us to engage and support and help people with anything from fear of going back to school to tactical things like accessing high school transcripts for up to 24 or 36 months before they're in a position to actually re-enroll. So once we've engaged with them, we support them on whatever their journey is, help them get back to school. And then once they're back in school, we continue to support them all the way to graduation because we do not want them just to come back and drop out again. We provide them continued persistence support all the way in. Now, I could get all into the wonkiness of it, but a fair amount of data, some coaches in there, and a lot of technology helps us do this at scale.
Thank you for that. And if I may, Mr. Chair, follow up. So when you say partner with Kansas, I hear funding. So can you explain that?
Yes, Senator. So the way our model works is we generally partner directly with the state of Kansas, usually through some existing agency or vehicle you have. Sometimes that's workforce, sometimes that's your state higher education office. In this case, it would be KBOR, to provide funding to ultimately do this work and create a centralized entity within the state.
You ever worked with universities directly or technical schools and just gone to them and say, hey, there are people who started there and haven't finished. We'd be happy to partner with you and help these people come back?
Yes, Senator. We did that for the first 6 years, and we actually still do it today. And we're more than happy to work with your schools individually. The challenge in working directly with individual schools is the cost is much higher, as much as 4 times as a partnering centralized state. There's just economies of scale. And when you partner directly with an institution, those institutions do not want those students to go to other schools. So you don't get any of that transfer effect. Now, I don't want to speak for any of your schools in the state, but they're all thinking about their own enrollment. They don't want their person who stopped out to be able to go into another institution. So when we have a statewide approach, we have all the schools engaged, all of their programs available to learners, and that allows for the economies of scale, and that allows for the most optionality.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for the question. Next, we'll go to Senator Petty. Then after that, we'll go to Representative Haskins.
Thank you. There was a comment that you made, and so I'm not sure I quite understood this. It's about that right now, with people that drop out, we're supporting people who will quit that year. You made that comment. Mm-hmm. And so I'm trying to understand what you meant by how, I guess as a state, that we are supporting those people who drop out.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Senator Petty. Excellent question, and I'll clarify. When we say that, when we go into a state, we calculate how many people stop out in a given year. So I mentioned you have 10,000 people who stopped out in this year. Well, we look at what your average subsidy is for those learners. So they're paying tuition, but you, of course, are subsidizing them through appropriations. We multiply that by 10,000 to get to that number. So if you have 10,000 learners, best we can tell, you have about roughly 9,000 per learner subsidy. If I'm inaccurate in that number, correct us and we'll correct those numbers. That adds up to get to that 90 million in sunk cost per year.
So just as a follow-up, so is that making an assumption that just because wherever they're at, I mean, you referred to some like only having, 15 hours or 20 hours and dropping out, but isn't that making an assumption that they're not then a productive person? Are we just basing that on the fact that they don't have either an associate or a four-year degree?
I make no assumptions on whether they're productive, but what I can say is that the vast majority of learners who do stop out are struggling in that first year, and often for several years to come. In fact, the vast majority, we have 1.7 million of these learners in our database today. The vast majority that we interact with are struggling. They may be productive. A great example I told over lunch earlier today is I have a hairdresser. She actually stopped out from one of our colleges. She's been contacted by our program. She told me, I'm very happy where I am in my life. I make $80,000 a year, and I'm doing quite well. That's okay. Not all those 400,000 are going to come back because many of them have found their path. Many, though, are struggling. The data shows us that if you don't have a post-secondary credential, and I'm not just talking about four-year degrees, again, credential can mean a simple certificate that gives them a pathway to a trade skill. But if they don't have that trade skill, statistically, they're more likely to be struggling in life.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Petty. We'll go to Representative Haskins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your testimony. And it sounds like your company is a holistic student service type of organization. You're for-profit, right, of a company. And so, and this is something that's in my wheelhouse. I've been the professor and enrollment manager for a university. So I respect what is trying to be accomplished, but I haven't really heard the success stories yet. I've heard anecdotal stories, but percentage-wise, and I see on the website here that Emporia State University is a partner. Maybe you can start there and tell us what success and how the partnership is going, and let us learn a little bit about what's currently going on.
Yes. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Representative Haskins. I don't have the latest data on Emporia State. They are a relatively new partner. So they did partner with us directly, as the question was asked earlier, if we partner directly with school. It is relatively new, so I don't have that data available. I'm more than happy to follow up and provide that data. The simple stories that I'd have to go back to actually point back to some of those case studies again. I mentioned earlier, 24 months. In New Jersey, 11,000 students returned. North Carolina, of course, 24 months, much smaller population, 3,700 return. We have a one-pager here with additional details on additional states. Michigan's been working with us, slowly scaling up for many years. They've had 8,200 people return. A great example, though, getting down to an individual school that I do know the data off the top of my head, sadly not in Kansas, University of North Carolina, Pembroke, school that was really struggling, regional public, serving average population within their area. After partnering with us, they've seen 6% of their enrollment now come from the Some College No Credential. They've disproportionately benefited. They were struggling to be effective. They were struggling to compete with these large online schools. This has made students in their area aware of this program and helped them find their way to a very good, very affordable regional institution. We'd be more than happy, though, to provide some additional case studies by individual schools, both in Kansas and in neighboring states, as a follow-up.
I think that would be helpful. Mr. Chair, one more question, please. From my experience on this, there are successful corporations from this, but often for the institution, this requires more work of any type of enrollment team up front, as well as the profit of this, or how we make money, going back to my colleague on the Senate side, is usually a revenue sharing approach in which there's a percentage of the tuition revenue gain that goes to such corporation. Is that similar to your model? Is that what?
Thank you for the question. In terms of our individual universities, that's how we work. Some of the time. We do have flat fee programs as well that does bring the cost down for the institution if they choose to go about that approach. In our state model, it is structured as a flat annual fee. That allows me to bring the cost down by about 70%. There's a whole bunch of wonky reasons that I could dig into that with you, but we've got enough data behind us now that we're able to offer that as an option. In terms of the burden on the individual institutions, we don't simply just throw these learners over the fence. We're there holding their hand through the entire process, and then we continue to hold their hand all the way to graduation. That continued support is absolutely critical to ensure that it doesn't create an additional burden on the school. That said, most schools are struggling with enrollment right now, are looking for additional enrollment, and are happy for that extra uplift. Your average school can see anywhere from 2 to 6% additional over the course of the year, and again, some schools do benefit disproportionately. Community colleges, technical colleges, schools with online programs, and regionals will benefit. This isn't typically like a program that flagship institutions participate in. Their admission requirements are just too stringent.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair, if I could just make a request that some of the slides are pretty powerful, but I'm missing the source. And so if you couldn't mind bringing us the reference and sources for some of your slides, that would be great. Thank you.
We'll bring that in as a follow-up.
Thank you, Tara. Thank you, Representative Haskins. We'll go to Senator Argabright next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your information. I have 2 questions. You mentioned diagnostic, just a short version of what that looks like. And my second question is, with the data that you've provided about Kansas, how many staff would you dedicate to Kansas if we were to partner with you?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Senator Argabright. Happy to get the information. Actually, will you clarify? You said I mentioned diagnostics. You might have to remind me at what point I referenced diagnostics.
On the students, if I understood it right, that there was a diagnostic piece to it, and the short version of what that looks like.
Absolutely. So we've, having done this for 10 years, we have collected a fair amount of information on students. We know where they live. We know trends in terms of their demographics and background. This allows us to be predictive in how we reach out to them. Now, specifically what that means is we're focusing on what is most likely to get them to initially engage in the conversation, and we're focusing on things that will allow us to predict risk of stopping out again. So what that might mean is certain types of words, certain types of communication could be motivators for some students and could be detractors for other students. We customize the communication to that learner to meet them where they are, both in terms of our automated messaging and in terms of our coaching. So our coaches will see this learner represents this persona, and they have some recommendations on how to engage. As the learner engages with us, that system continues to learn and continues to support, guide how we interact with them over time. And I apologize, you asked me a second question.
Mr. Chair? Yeah, so on the diagnostic piece, it has nothing to do with skill sets. It's more has to do with recruiting and trying to get that student back. Is that correct?
That is correct. Now,
Okay.
if they tell us things about what their skill sets are or what they're interested in, we do use their background and skill to help guide them to a next program, particularly if they are going to transfer. But in many cases, we don't know where they have been over the last 10 or so years. A good 35% of our learners have been out 7 years plus. We have to engage with them and learn where they are in life before we're able to guide them to a specific program.
Okay, Mr. Chair. The second question was if Kansas were to partner with you, how many staff members would you dedicate to Kansas based on the data you provided?
Happy to, thank you, Senator. Happy to follow up with some examples. It really depends on how many schools and how many individual residents would be eligible for the program. Some of our states have started with 4 or 5 schools to start. Some of them have gone all in right out of the gate, such as the example from New Jersey with 22. varies significantly in terms of how many people support. But when we do partner, we provide examples of how many coaches are going to be available, but we're not just a call center, we're a technology company, but we also provide information on all the people around the company that will participate, both in terms of full-time and partial time. Ultimately, the benefit to Kansas, and particularly at this stage of our organization, is that we have such national presence. We are the only people doing this at a statewide level that allows you to benefit from economies of scale of other states that we're supporting as well.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Tara. We'll go to Senator Shane, then we'll go to Vice Chair Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So a couple of questions, if I might. So when you enter into these agreements, do the institutions, as part of participating, need to enter into interinstitutional agreements to agree to accept credits and so on and so forth? Is that kind of a compulsory part of the program?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator Shane. Yes, as part of the program, the institutions do, if I understand your question correctly, the institutions do need to enter into a data agreement with us to share their data, and they also need to be willing to accept students that come from the program. Now, their existing admission standards still stand. So we're not asking them to change admission standards. We're not asking them to change anything necessarily about how they function and how they admit students today. That said, as part of our work, we do look at trends in how individual schools are performing. We also look at the policies of every single school within the state, along with the policies in Kansas. We compare that to your neighboring states. We compare that to national standards. So over time, we work with schools to improve how well they support this population. A simple, great example of this is in one of our early state partners, there were unusually burdensome application processes in about 17 of the initial partnering schools. After a year, we were able to show them the data on how this was preventing people from coming back. They changed those admissions process. It was a small change on the part of the institution that didn't meaningfully affect their standards and allowed a lot more people to be able to come back in. So we use the data and trends to help the institutions better understand how their policies are affecting this population, but we do not require them to change anything in order to partner with us.
Yeah, I guess part of where I was going is that, to me, it would make sense if you want to try to bring a learner back into the learning environment that they would be given credit for work that they had performed, even if at a different institution. And I know a lot of the times one university might think that their expository writing class is substantially different from another university's expository writing class, and they don't want to accept the credit. So that was kind of the basis of that question. And another question, I guess this is kind of a two-part. It sounds like, as a technology company, to be able to paint a learner profile, you're pulling in data from other sources outside of this database. Could you elaborate on that? And then as a follow-on to that, does your company subsequently monetize the data that you have collected as part of this process outside of just the rates and fees that you collect from your partnering institutions or states?
Thank you, Senator. It's an excellent question. Now, we do collect a fair amount of information directly from the schools, so it builds a pretty substantial profile on that learner just from the individual schools. We do append that with publicly available data, much like any private organization or company does today. Most of the appendment that we do is giving us contact information. That's the primary thing that we're looking for, because most of the institutions, part of the reason too that they do not do this outreach, they don't have good contact information. Because we do this at such massive scale, we can buy that contact information at a far discounted rate over your average individual school. In terms of your second question of do we monetize this data in any other way? Absolutely not. This is protected data. This data stays within the state of Kansas. In terms of we do not share it out. Like, we may share aggregate data in terms of performance, not unlike what I'm sharing with you today, but we do not monetize the data in any other way.
Thank you, Senator. We'll go to Vice Chair Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here, Tara. So I have a question about how re-up charges. Do you do things on a commission type basis? Like if you produce somebody who re-enrolls, do you get paid in that way, or just how does your compensation work?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Representative Sanders. Excellent question. When we partner with individual schools, we do get paid on a pay-for-performance basis. By and large, there are a few exceptions there. So the institution will provide a revenue share for every learner that's brought back in. When we partner with states, it is a flat fee. We pay a flat fee each year, and because of that, I'm able to bring the cost down significantly. Particularly on the scale of about 60–70% cheaper than the individual university partnering with us, or on a pay-for-performance basis.
So for the individual schools, what would be the objection? Why wouldn't everybody sign up? Because if you don't produce, they're not going to have to pay anything. Am I missing something?
We do have very high uptick. Or very high uptake in terms of the schools that are participating, because they do get so many enrollments out of it. Why the schools don't partner individually with us, many schools, this just is not a priority for them. I won't name names, but it wasn't in Kansas. I was with a very large regional university just a few months ago. They had 50,000 stop-outs just from that school. We were in discussions to work with them. They said, we don't care. Quite frankly, institutions think about this as a way to fill an enrollment gap within their institution. They don't really think about it broadly in terms of the economic impact for the economy. They've lost a few people that stopped down. Now I can fill a few more of those seats to get people back in. It helps with my budget. It helps with my enrollment goals at the state. But when we work at this through the state level, you all have a much more expansive view of this problem and what the opportunity is. You all are thinking about this in terms of your workforce pipeline. You all are thinking about this in terms of how many of these people may be on some state support, what they're contributing in terms of income tax, what they're contributing in terms of the tax base within the state. Institutions think about this narrowly. We partner with states, and we shifted to partnering with states 3 years ago because you think about it expansively. And in that expansive way, you're thinking about it in the same way that the learners are. They're not thinking about how I can go back and get a degree. They're thinking about how I get a better job and how I support my family.
Mr. Chair, so I appreciate those comments. So would it be fair to say that the institutions are more concerned about academics than business?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I can't speak for them individually. What I will say is they have complex concerns. And I think it varies from one institution to the next. The school I referenced, but will not name, they have a very specific funding formula from that state. That funding formula is based on a 6-year graduation rate. Many of these people have been out for more than 6 years. They don't affect the 6-year graduation rate. That school was operating towards the funding formula that was given to them. And this population did not affect that funding formula, so it was not a priority for them. Every school is different, though. What I will say is that your regional schools and community colleges, not to say that the other ones don't care, do tend to place a higher emphasis on this population versus others because they do see the opportunity in the adult learner group.
All right, and one final question, if I might. A year or two ago, I heard the concept of completers. And this was from a president at a 4-year institution that says, we've got a big problem with people coming for 2 or 3 years and then dropping out and have nothing but a mountain of debt.
Yes.
So we're shifting their focus to make sure that if people go a couple of years, they've got something. They've got some kind of a piece of paper to show that they've accomplished something. Do you see that being a trend?
Thank you, Representative. I certainly hope so. This is one of the policies that we advocate for, that when people do come back, you try to get them stepped credentials along the way that allows a learner to benefit over time. My previous company was the largest education benefit provider in the country. We provided support like this for Fortune 500 companies, helping their frontline workers gain access to education. We saw some success in that program. We hope to see more of that at this level. To date, that is still rare, and it's more concept and is being executed and tested in certain environments. Certainly, we know our learners would appreciate that. In fact, more than anything, beyond the credential, it actually gives them confidence. Many of our learners are just fearful. They have anxiety. They talk to us every day. I have 10 million recorded interactions with learners, and I hear things like, well, what if I go back to school and it's just a bunch of 19 and 20-year-olds and I'm 32 and I won't belong? Knowing that they can get a credential fast and cheap reduces the anxiety and the fear that comes with taking this candidly big step. If you think about it, this is the second biggest investment you'll make in your life if you're lucky enough to buy a house. And you do it without a real estate broker and without mortgage laws. Nobody really helps people make this big financial decision.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair. We have time for one more question before the senators got to head to the floor. We'll go to Ranking Minority Member Representative Amix.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Tara, thank you for coming today. You estimate that we have about 413,000 plus Kansans that have some college, no credential. What's a reasonable percentage or number out of that 413,000 that you'll actually be able to recruit and place in a situation of becoming a degree or certificate earner?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Representative. That's an excellent question. I will give you a complex answer as simple as I can. In part, depends on how many years we're doing it. But a simple answer would be to think about it like this. However many of that 413,000 that we can get into a centralized database, you could expect over a 5-year period to see around 10% of those people return with my current capabilities today. Now, I have a technology team, a product team. My head of engineering is based in Kansas City. He's currently down in Austin, our headquarters, working with our product group to develop new solutions. So I hope to be able to come back to you in a year or 2 years and be able to increase that. But as of today, if we had 400,000 in that database, we would expect to see, give or take, around 40,000 returned over a 5-year period.
Thank you, Representative Amix, and I appreciate everybody's questions and joining us today for the presentation for Re-Up Education. Tara, we really appreciate the information you've provided. I think it's stirred some curiosity amongst us, both in the House and Senate, about the potential of what we could do in the future and shedding some light on this opportunity. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Chair.
I will go to Chair Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to thank you for being here for this presentation. Thank you to our House colleagues and you, Mr. Chair, for allowing us to have this joint meeting. And we are due on the floor, so with your permission, we will excuse ourselves.
Very good. Did you have any announcements for anything? Okay. Senators, thank you for your attendance. I don't think I have any major announcements for the House members. We don't have any planned meetings for tomorrow or Friday. So we're working on an agenda for probably 2 weeks out. I don't have anything scheduled for next week. Do you guys have any questions for me? Okay. Well, seeing none, I'm sure Tara would be glad to visit with you after we're done here. So thank you very much. The meeting is adjourned.